To the kids who grew up online. To the kids who withdrew from the overwhelm of the outside world. To the kids who see reflections of themselves everywhere but can never feel whole. To the kids searching for aesthetics, labels, and ideologies in hopes of finding a community to call home. Here is the multiverse, a creative construction distinctly without limits, within which each tiny member of each universe sets their own, at bare minimum as a reason to make sense of it all. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is a film that understands the symbolic gravitas of its setting. It opens with a mission. Let's do things differently this time. That is the first theme of the movie. It may be the most significant. On the topic of doing things differently, today's video is sponsored by Surfshark. A VPN can present an important change to your internet lifestyle. Surfshark encrypts your device's internet usage, allowing you to surf the internet safely and securely. It also gives you the freedom to travel through the global internet, a multiverse in its own right. This means that if you're one of my many Canadian viewers, hi Awa, or you're somewhere in South America, like Chile maybe, ¿qué tal danae? You can use streaming services like HBO Max for the former, or Peacock for the latter, which are normally unavailable in your country. I have internet security workers in my family. I've known for some time how important it is to have a VPN, especially if you're doing things like business internationally, for instance. And thankfully, we've got a special deal with one of the premier VPNs in Surfshark for those of you willing to try it. Surfshark is offering 3 extra months for free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. A 24-month VPN plan can make a huge difference as far as the safety and the integrity and entertainment of your life online. Just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description and use the promo code. So what are you waiting for? Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring, and let's get back to the video. Colors and shapes burst as Gwen Stacy, high school student and Spider-Woman of Earth 65, recalls Miles Morales, her dear friend from another realm, a realm that is, at the time, impossible for her to reach, and yet defiantly she holds on to his memory, declaring even in his absence that he is not alone. He's not the only one, she repeats, in describing his struggle, his journey, even his suffering due to her actions. This is the second theme of the movie. And then the conflict. Gwen's ruminations on change and community are tortured by regret. She channels her rebellious spirit into a frenetic drum solo. In the present, she's jamming with a band, and her bandmates are worried about her, trying to lend her their support and good vibes, but she won't budge. She is stuck in her own head, uninterested in engaging with the world around her. Her traumas and stresses feel too heavy to move past. There is no hope of doing things differently. She isolates herself. Over the course of 2 hours, Across the Universe soars through times and spaces, depicting various characters who struggle to grapple with the enormity and complexity of existence. Older generations are perplexed by their increasingly chaotic realities, and younger generations scoff, knowing there to be infinitely more realities beyond just their own. Gwen is saddled with the task of trying to defeat a superpowered villain, the Vulture, from an Italian Renaissance alternate universe, who has crossed over into Earth 65 against his own will and has reacted by demolishing a museum. The viewer is astounded by the beautifully detailed crossover and animation styles, a key element of the Spider-Verse film series that communicates thematic concepts. Where its predecessor Into the Spider-Verse employs this element sharply and excitingly, Across the Spider-Verse dials it up to 11. Almost every shot is laboriously textured. Color schemes change to fit Gwen's mood during her narrations. More animation styles are explored than ever, 3D and live action dancing through hyper-textured environments. It reaches the point of hardly being identifiable as a cartoon. It's every cartoon ever. It's video games and Hollywood razzle-dazzle. It's something entirely new and unprecedented. But instead of the animation celebrating itself cheekily through the movie with like MCU-style dialogue from each character about how amazing what you've just seen is, the vast detail and the color and the extraness almost serves as a type of oppressive force against the film's storyline, intentionally so. Characters have very real, very grounded arcs and motivations. None are fully able to grasp what they've normalized. The universe is larger than anything they could actually imagine, but ultimately, all they want is a little help. After the Vulture is just barely harangued by Spider-Man 2099 Miguel O'Hara and Spider-Woman Jess Drew, each hopping in from another dimension to suppress universal travel and imprison bad guys, the two save Gwen from arrest at the hands of her own father, a soon-to-be police captain whose commitment to his post and to stopping Spider-Woman leaves him at odds with his daughter. Gwen tearfully pleads to become a part of their interdimensional band, the Spider Society, unwilling to turn back to her cruel circumstances. "I don't know how to fix this," she says. "Join the club," O'Hara responds. In our previous videos in this series about infantilization, we've established that being treated like a child is often insulting and abusive, and it's something that we also kind of do to ourselves. This in part comes from how we view children, our ideology about what a child is. An ideology which views children as incapable of strong independent thinking and agency. In reality, while we have a duty to protect those who are younger than us and to keep them away from dangerous situations and whatnot, children's lack of physical and experiential maturity does not at all equate to them being stupid. 20th century American history alone contains tons of examples of children working together, collectivizing to try to make a difference in an unjust situation. Organizations like the National Student League and Youth Liberation of Ann Arbor pushed ardently for social and political change. As Robert Cohen writes in the introduction of his book, When the Old Left Was Young, Student Radicals and America's First Mass Student Movement, 1929 to 1941, the student rebels of the Depression era rank among the most effective radical organizers in the history of American student politics. They built a large and influential student protest movement, organized America's first national student strikes, and shaped political discourse on campus for the better part of a decade. Organizational efforts by young people have not merely come from student classes either. You might, for instance, know about the famous Newsboys uprising of 1899, which was depicted in a 90s film with Christian Bale called Newsies, and then became a musical years later. I hear it's good. However, a ton of the radical collectivism and the scale of newsy rebellion that occurred in the late 19th and early 20th centuries has been omitted from popular history, despite how compelling the stories are and how prevalent that one strike alone has been in certain parts of media, as well as the cultural impact the Newsboys have had in American and thus global English parlance. Extra, read all about it. In the book Crying the News, A History of America's Newsboys, professor and journalist Vincent DiGirolamo notes that newsboys typically remained in working class occupations and held corresponding social views, and that economic disparities and occasionally political disputes led newsboys to mount strikes and join demonstrations throughout the decade. Of course, it's not to say that every newsboy was a goddamn revolutionary. There were tons of problematic tendencies and complexities within the newsboy experience, and there were tons of conflicts that occurred across the different identities of newsies. Of course, newsies were not just boys, but they were also not just white boys. They came from a variety of different backgrounds and were often pitted against each other in different ways, and yet still, they often came together to fight for each other's rights. In 1883, for example, the quote, colored newsboys of Richmond refused to sell the weekly Democratic campaign and persuaded their white news brother to do the same. Blacks and whites led the Cleveland Newsboys strike of 1894 and mounted a protest the same year in response to a mayoral edict barring all newsboys from the Junction area downtown. As far as strikes, the 1899 strike is the one that gets talked about a lot, and in the film Newsies, there's a general sense that it's something that emerged as an aberration out of nowhere. In reality, there were tons of other strikes. To name a few, there's record of newsboy strikes in January 1890 in Buffalo, July 1890 in Brooklyn, December 1890 in Texas, May 1891 in Duluth, Minnesota, July 1892 in Homestead and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, May 1893 in Brooklyn again, March 1894 in Washington, D.C., May 1894 in Chicago, and July 1894 St. Paul, Minnesota, and Sioux City, Iowa. This only made up a few instances of strikes from newsboys working together to protest the negative situations they were placed in as essentially shadow laborers for large corporations. In the first half of a decade in which we saw some of the most radical collectivist socialist efforts in American history, led by figures like Eugene V. Debs. It seems like A huge part of what makes Spider-Verse so exciting for young people right now, such a powerful movie for so many people, is this depiction of young people across these different backgrounds, talking about the beauties and struggles of their culture and exploitation, and working together eventually to collectively try to change the way things are, despite the fact that systems are working against them. Rather than fall in line with a typical superhero story of extraordinary individuals who are way better than you, who will save the day inevitably if you just get out of their way and let them keep everything peaceful.
I have successfully privatized world peace.
This is a story in Spider-Verse of ordinary people, essentially, who are placed in extraordinary situations and have ordinary insecurities and wants and desires and ordinary flaws. And at the end of the day, are able to do extraordinary things not because they're amazing and powerful, but because they recognize their own strengths and weaknesses and they work with each other to try to overcome them in favor of making their situation better. This is the type of story that gives hope to young people in a time where most media is giving them ironic detachment. But the thing is, a lot of the comments I see about Spider-Verse are about the universe and about the characters sort of in their space. Oh my god, this guy's so cool. What are they going to do with this character? Does this make sense for the canon? That's great. But we can't make the mistake of assuming that the Spider-Verse is really about just the Spider-Verse, because that kind of leads us to feel like this thing only would happen with a bunch of spider people who are really cool, and we miss a point that it could actually be us in a way. I mean, I say us, I'm a young person. I'm 26, I'm a young person, right? What I'm saying is, this happens in real life. It's happened throughout history. It happens now. The Spider-Verse films are using pomp and circumstance and expensive IP to tell real stories. The multiverse represents something that's real. It mirrors experiences that young people are having constantly, logging on and communicating with people from different countries, India and the UK, across different cultural backgrounds, and witnessing these issues that transcend all of our different universes, all of our pockets of culture, and create these larger struggles that feel almost impossible to face. Whether it's our continuously worsening climate crises, our economic crises, injustice of all kinds, war, it is often an experience of basically anyone, not just young people, of course, but especially the generation growing up, engaging with life via social media apps to feel just constant overwhelm, constant colorful imagery bursting across screens over and over again. So many things that are more beautiful than you can ever possibly imagine, just scrolling past it. And then most horrible things you could ever imagine, scrolling past it on the same timeline. And it puts us in this state of paralysis, of fear. It puts us in a place of not understanding who we are and what our place is in things, and makes us overthink and struggle constantly with trying to tell people what we really want to do, and trying to assert that in fact our worldview is valid, and also trying to rationally construct a worldview. The point is, the multiverse is something that represents something larger. The question is, how are we going to take that and apply it to our own realities?
Well, it's the first time for everything, right?
The young people that make up the spider people of Across the Spider-Verse are responding to the multiverse in a way that mirrors how young people throughout history and in our current moment can and have responded to the gigantic crises of their time. But this is something that we don't really think about often. In part, we ignore histories of youth movements and collectivization because of the suppression of textbooks and media. But we're also conditioned to do so because of that aforementioned social ideology about the child. That the child is not capable of doing the kind of thing that would make a difference. Not capable of having an opinion that could be more valid than the adults that are powerful. You have that scene of Miguel O'Hara apprehending and assaulting Miles Morales to try to corral him to stop trying to save his father. And he tells him, "You're just a kid." It's this kind of motif that pops up multiple times in that struggle. It feels a lot like when you have an argument with your own parents and you tell them, hey, your worldview about this thing is extremely antiquated and problematic. You shouldn't talk about black people that way or gay people that way. And they respond with, well, you'll see when you get older. You'll see when you have more experience. These things can't be helped. They can't be changed. This is the way the world works. And you just don't get it yet because you're just a kid. As we've discussed previously on this channel, our systems of education and parenting are based on domination, control, prescription. We prescribe to kids who they are and then force them to act a certain way as a result. We convince ourselves that we do this for their own good. That on the other side of our behaviors and our norms is pure chaos, and the kind of chaos that must be evil, must be destruction. It's kind of a dynamic of humans and their inability to deal with lack of stability. We convince ourselves that a person's age and status is indicative of their value, and thus their knowledge, their awareness. And thus, a child cannot know what is good for them. This is a lie. Children can know just like adults can know. And they can both not know. Both will make mistakes. Everyone will make mistakes, but who's to decide which mistakes should slide and which should be punished? Who's to tell us where we belong and how each of us should behave? Miles' reality, his experiences represent a glitch in the system. To Miguel O'Hara, an aberration, something that was a mistake, something that shouldn't happen. O'Hara is deeply frustrated about the idea of going against any type of order, any type of knowing and security, because he's seen that sometimes on the other side of that knowing and security, things can be worse. And he's so afraid to get to that other side of things that he refuses, especially through his leadership, to allow such a thing to happen for anyone. He refuses to believe that there could be a good alternative. He's frustrated by a defiance towards his sectarian order, as Freire would call it. And yes, it's time to talk about Paulo Freire again. He says sectarianism attempts to domesticate the present so that he or she hopes the future will reproduce this domesticated present, and which considers the future pre-established, a kind of inevitable fate, fortune, or destiny. But if we think about the character arcs of Gwen and Miles and other characters within Across the Spider-Verse, we see that it is this very tendency to prescribe and to create sectarianism, to say this is the world as it should exist, this is how it is, and we must contain ourselves in order to avoid the horrible chaos that exists in any alternative, meaning that any idea that you have of doing things differently has to be beat out of you. We see that this is something that they struggle with and that makes their realities a living hell, with both of their fathers being police officers, forcing them to constantly lie, and forcing Gwen's father at one point to have to violently arrest his child in order to maintain that order. In a basic sense, the two main themes of Across the Spider-Verse are to do things differently, as said in the first line, and to work together. Given the way the film centers youth and rebellion, it can be said that also the film is about young people being capable of changing their surroundings. But if we take into account the meaning of the multiverse, not just a cool theme that lets us draw different Spider-Men, but a meaningful construct, we can see it actually as an instruction manual for how to change the world. An instruction manual for how to defy authoritarian social order and how to make the multiverse a better place. Across the Spider-Verse has a bunch of instructions for us, regardless of age, and how to deal with our situations politically and personally. First, it tells us to engage. Stop playing your drum solo over all of the noise. Stop shutting people out. Stop trying to escape so much. Your problems won't go away if you ignore them. Stop burrowing yourself in your room. Go out and ask for help if you need it. Go out and try to solve the issues that are bothering you. Make genuine connections. Ask people questions about what they need and figure out ways to help fulfill those needs so that you can work together to better yourselves and your environments. It tells us that we may damn well be onto something when we feel suspicion towards our environments. It tells us that structure and order are not always what they seem. It tells us that even when we are young, naive, and prone to mistakes, we can still do the improbable, especially when we collectivize, when we build consciousness within our groups, and when we amass more and more resources. Watches. Perhaps most importantly, it also tells us to stop prescribing. There is no ultimate solution. There is no natural law for human organization. There's just us, here, now. We aren't God. We don't tell people what to do. The more we do so, the less they listen. We're not fit to control other people's choices, and people are not interested in being controlled. If we want people to be at their best, to work with us, if we want them to help us and to help them, we need to stop telling people how their story is supposed to go.
That's all it is, Miles. A leap of faith.
Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. You can access that promotion by clicking the link in the description. Thank you. It's been so long.